You have a pretty interesting story out of California that deals with gun carry that I think is probably going to be a pretty significant one moving forward when we talk about legal challenges to these new gun carry regimes in some deep blue states like California, or specifically in deep blue localities. Can you give us a little bit of background on what exactly happened here?
Sure. Yeah. So the city of Verne, California, it's a relatively small city just outside of Los Angeles. It's one of the suburbs in the sort of the LA metro area. They have just announced they're finally opening up their concealed carry permit application process. So, some 9 months after the Bruin decision was handed down. Didn't waste any time, I guess. But that's not the biggest part. They put a fee schedule, a chart on their website, basically breaking down the cost of what it's going to take for residents to apply. And for first-time applicants, the fees total to just under $1,100 to apply for a carry permit, which is by far the biggest amount that I've seen anywhere in the country thus far. I know what's
typical, I think, for other states. Most states have some sort of concealed carry permit. Give us an idea of what some of states who've had this for decades actually charge.
Sure. So my own personal experience here in Colorado, at the state level, they're capped at charging $52 is the max they're allowed to charge. And localities can tack on up to another $100 on top of that. So no more than $152 for the whole process. Right. I know other states like Pennsylvania, it's something like $20. I believe Indiana, you can get a lifetime permit for something like $20 to $30. So $1,000 is by far and away outside the norm for states that have been doing this for, as you said, decades.
Yeah, in Virginia, we have a $50 fee. So that's more normal. I think DC was a pretty big outlier when they moved to shall issue, or when they started issuing permits years ago. And theirs, I think, is about $100 plus, there's fingerprinting fees. And then you also have to get a more extensive class as well. So it adds up to a couple $100 usually when all's said and done. But yeah, so this new process out in California in this locality is pretty far outside of the norm, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, their breakdown of charges, you can tell that they're just finding in my opinion, finding every reason to tack on charges to kind of perhaps dissuade people from applying. Because if you look at the piece that I wrote, there's a fee for processing, there's a fee for administrative, there's a fee for licensing, there's a fee for the CCW card. I'm not sure how licensing and CCW card are different. I'm not sure how administrative and processing are different. It's just all these racked up charges that you're just finding every way to potentially get more money out of an applicant and perhaps dissuade especially lower income folks from applying for these permits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty transparent what they're trying to do with this,
right?
Which is they don't want to issue concealed carry permits, and so they're going to make it as hard as possible for people to get those permits. But it seems like they're probably going to run into some legal problems with this, right?
Yeah. So if listeners will recall, the Bruin decision actually specifically addressed this in a part of the majority. Justice Thomas, on one hand, basically gave a blessing to shall issue states that objectively issue permits. He said, we're not here to cast doubt on permitting per se. However, he basically said we reserve the right to address constitutional challenges to licensing regimes that are either onerous because the process is just really long and it creates a delay in the ability to carry, or that's exorbitantly expensive, which in this case, in my opinion, it would seem that a $1,000 plus license might fall into that camp. So
yeah. And that's just for your first time applying, right? There's also renewal fees, right? And how quickly do you have to renew under this?
Yeah. So under California law, concealed carry permits are only valid for 2 years. So you'd have to renew every 2 years. Going back to what we talked about, what the norm is elsewhere, it's usually 5 years in other states is what I found is typical.
Virginia's 5.
So it's 2 years, and don't worry, you get a little bit of a discount on your renewal. It's just $647 this time to renew every 2 years. So they're saving you a little bit of money there when you want to re-up your permit.
Yeah. And so, ultimately, this will probably result in some sort of legal action, right? Isn't there already a gun rights group that's looking into this?
Yeah, so the California Rifle and Pistol Association, they're a big gun rights group out there in California. We've covered them in gun stories in the past in the state. They this week, as of our recording, sent a letter to the city and the police department there in Laverne, basically saying this is unacceptable. We're keeping an eye on this. They cite Justice Thomas's quote from the Bruin opinion about, hey, you can't just charge exorbitant fees. And they said, hey, we're happy to work with you to, figure out where we can knock down some of those costs. And if you don't, we will have no other choice but to start litigation. So clearly they've been put on notice. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like the town has sort of understood that this is probably not going to go well for them. And there's going to be a forthcoming meeting to perhaps decide where they're going to go going forward. Yeah. So we'll have to see how that goes. But it does, in fact, look like there's perhaps going to be some litigation against this.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where things end up. I mean, you don't propose these sort of fees not understanding the legal risks of doing that. Maybe they'll back down now that a group is specifically saying they're going to sue them. But, we'll have to wait and see. But I think this is probably part of a larger story, really, that involves, how some of these blue states and deep blue localities have reacted to the Bruin ruling and what they're trying to do to counteract what the court said is necessary. And so, fees is certainly one part of it. Onerous process of, making the safety training course as complicated as possible and as long as possible. These are, and then obviously the other side of it, which we've talked a lot about, which is restricting where you can legally take your gun, even if you have a permit. Those were the ways that DC tried to deal with this issue when they were forced to adopt a shall issue permit several years back. And so it's no surprise that that's how a lot of these localities and states have tried to deal with it now, although they all seem to have pushed things even further beyond what DC did, which was already among the strictest as far as shall issue permitting goes in the nation. So I imagine we're going to start to see the edges of what's constitutionally acceptable be defined here in the near future. And so this one could be an area where how much you can charge people to obtain a government license to exercise a constitutional right, a right that the Supreme Court has recognized as protected by the Second Amendment. What the limits of that are will probably be spelled out pretty soon here, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's one thing worth keeping in mind that California has still yet to pass its New York copycat anti-Bruin bill, So if litigation obviously takes time, even if the gun rights groups file suit against this particular city, it could be a situation where residents of this particular city are stuck, on the one hand, having to pay exorbitant amounts of money to get a permit. And then once that California bill kicks in, suddenly not really being able to take advantage of the permit at all in the first place, because, vast swaths of the state are now sensitive places. And there's all these time, place, and manner restrictions on where they can carry their guns. So it really could create sort of a whirlwind for folks for, as you said, trying to exercise a now recognized constitutional right to carry a firearm.
Yeah. And that's just the political reality in these states, I think. Unfortunate for those who live there and want to be able to exercise this right. But I think everyone should have expected that this is how they would react. They would try to push the boundaries of what they can do under the new rules and go well beyond those boundaries until they're told otherwise by the courts. So hopefully we'll see quick court action on this. I mean, that's sort of the linchpin for all these things, is whether the lower courts are going to enforce the Bruin ruling in line with what the Supreme Court wants. And if they don't, whether the Supreme Court is going to step in and go further on the issue. So those are the key things we're going to be watching for. Of course, we've already been covering a lot of this in other states like New York and New Jersey, where these fights have been playing out. But fees, we haven't really seen a marquee case on fees. And so this one might well create that sort of case. But we will continue to watch this, and I know you have a members piece that you're working on right now that should be out by the time the podcast is out. That looks at how some of these other localities and states have tried to implement their fee structures, and the differences between them, and whether how much of an outlier is this California locality compared to some of what others have done.